What is crackin', everybody? Hello and welcome back to Gaming 101 with Mr. Berger. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at this giant double prince deck. It's definitely a very powerful deck that contains an element of bait, both log and zap bait, as well as an element of beatdown, and even almost an element of bridge spam because it can be played pretty aggressively as well. So this deck used to be really OP. It was like a few metas ago, I think, and basically what happened is the Dark Prince kept getting buffed, and he got buffed, and he got buffed, and he got buffed again, and then he became super strong at one point. And you guys probably remember this because this was not that long ago. This was like a month or two ago at this point. And then they finally nerfed him. They gave him that shield HP nerf, which kind of made him fall out of the meta a little bit, but at the same time, honestly guys, I feel like he's still a really powerful card. I feel like the nerf that they gave him, and you've heard me say this before if you've seen my other videos, the nerf that they gave him I feel like was pretty unsubstantial. It's just not enough. It was enough to remove him from the meta, but I feel like personally it didn't change his mechanics too much, and they didn't nerf what was making him so powerful. He still has that shield mechanic, so he can still live through a rocket or a giant skeleton bomb and only lose his shield if it's still up. They just reduce the amount of damage that it can absorb before it breaks. So, although he got nerfed, I feel like this deck is still pretty legit. And if you played this deck before he got nerfed, then you know exactly what I mean. It was all over the place. The Golem Double Prince, the Giant Double Prince, I even did a Double Prince bait video at one point just for the fun of it. It was just everywhere. So anyway, I was surprised because although it had been nerfed and kind of fallen off of the meta a little bit, I saw it in the Archetype Challenge. And you know, I feel like the Archetype Challenge might have been something that they've been planning for a long time, because they definitely use some outdated archetypes. Like Splash Yard, come on. Splash Yard hasn't been played in forever, at least not that variation. With Bowler, like, you never see that anymore, at least rarely ever in my personal experience. I haven't seen that in a long time. So I do play some graveyard decks, but I play it with like a giant and poison, and you know, maybe there's an element of bait in there sometimes depending on the meta. You know, there's definitely, you know, graveyard freeze decks and things like that right now, but that Splash Yard, like, that was a joke. And if you didn't check out my stream, I streamed that whole challenge on this account, my alt account, that I use to record these videos on, not the one that we're actually watching the replay of right now. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I got through it. And in that challenge, in that Archetype Challenge, one of the decks that I had the most success with and I really enjoyed playing was this one, this giant double prince deck that I thought was kind of extinct, but turns out it still works out pretty well. So it was really good in the Archetype Challenge. Even though some of the decks were outdated, I feel like they did a pretty good job, and it was a pretty fun challenge overall. And I hope that they, you know, continue to do fun little challenges like that rather than just the same old ones over and over again. So I thought, alright, I had luck with it. And if you watched my stream, you'll remember it was the last two matches that I did in the final challenge. You know, not the warm-up rounds. I had 2 losses, so one more loss would mean I was out of the challenge, and I had 2 wins to go, and I got Giant Double Prince, I think 2 times in a row, and won both times with it. So I had a lot of fun with it, and I decided, alright, why don't I go ahead and just try this out in a classic challenge? So I decided to try it out, and I've been pleasantly surprised. It actually works out pretty well. And I just want to kind of break down some strategies. There's not too many card replacements that we can do, but I'll talk about a couple really quickly, and then we'll just talk about the replays and how it's played. So this deck, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, can be played a number of ways. It incorporates an element of a few different archetypes into it. It can be played very aggressively. You see at the beginning of this match here, I actually placed the giant behind the king tower as an opening move. But oftentimes with this deck, you can place the giant up at the bridge, especially if you've got a prince, a dark prince, or both behind it, or even just placing one of your zap or log bait cards behind it, one of your swarmy cards. Alright, so yeah, remember that. You can place it at the bridge, or you can place it in the back and kind of build up a snowball, depending on how you want to play. So one thing that you can do also is, because it can be played so aggressively, you can really afford to punch the opposite lane. So when you see them place a golem in the right lane, you can giant with a prince behind them, or maybe even just giant with bats or spear goblins behind it, because that's only a 7 elixir push, so you're not committing too much. Do that in the opposite lane, and then either A, they'll have to invest a bunch of Elixir into defending against that, and you haven't spent too much ideally, or they'll have to ignore it and lose a tower. And you know, honestly, this deck has so much strength that you can afford to let them go into their full golem push in one lane and probably win the push in the opposite lane before they can, you know, fully connect to your tower, because your push is a little bit quicker and a little bit more swarmy. So if they don't answer your big golem, or excuse me, your big giant double prince push with, you know, the goblin gang or whatever mixed in there, you can get the 3-crown win pretty easily. So don't be afraid to push opposite lane aggressively at the bridge when you see them place a big heavy tank in one lane. Alright? Now when you pump, you'll see that they actually pushed opposite lane a few times, but I feel like going against pump, you actually want to push the same lane generally, because if you do break through the tower, or if you have any sort of splash damage or spells or anything, which this deck does, you know, you got the poison, then you will be able to beat down that pump and destroy that pump as well while you're pushing down that same lane, rather than just letting it sit behind the opposite side of the arena's tower and, you know, just getting the opponent a bunch of elixir over time. So maybe same lane against pump, but again, same concept goes. When you see them pump up, you can play aggressive, you can play at the bridge, you can do goblin gang at the bridge. I generally like doing a giant, or at least like a dark prince in front before you use either your bats, your spear goblins, or your goblin gang behind them, because those will then play that tank role while you have those swarm units in the back kind of, you know, chipping away and doing a ton of damage. So there is also an element of beatdown to this deck. I kind of went over how to play it aggressively, more of like a bridge spam and a punish deck, but you can totally put the giant in the back. You can get up a big push going. You got the giant and you got the 2 princes, and you know, if they log your goblin gang or your spear goblins, then they won't log your prince and interrupt his charge. Or sometimes they'll waste the log on the prince or the dark prince, and then you can, you know, safely put in your spear goblins or your goblin gang. But that kind of goes into more of the element of spell bait, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Let's talk about the beatdown aspect of it more. With that giant, naturally you can build up a big snowball push, and you can get a massive kind of beatdown push going, and they won't be able to do anything about it. So as I mentioned, there is an element of spell bait. So if you are getting that big beatdown push going, or if you're even playing aggressively, you don't generally want to do like the spear goblins and the bats both behind the bridge or behind your tank, because then they'll just zap all that and it'll be gone in one zap, or maybe even fireball it, and that's still a equal elixir trade for them. Same thing goes for like the goblin gang and the spear goblins. Ideally they'll waste their log. Look at this pro poison, guys. Look at that pro poison, missing his elixir pump like a champ. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying. Ideally they'll log your spear goblins, and then you can more safely put down the goblin gang, because it's an equal elixir trade rather than a negative elixir trade for you. Whereas the goblin gang costs 1 more than the log, thus making it a negative elixir trade for you, positive for them. So you want to kind of bait out their spells. And again, keep in mind, guys, that log will be used on your princes as well, because they'll want to slow down your prince's charge. Even the zap, people will zap princes sometimes, prince or dark prince, to interrupt his charge so that he doesn't get that full charge damage off. So that element of log and zap bait also plays into the usage of your prince, not just your bats, your spear goblins, and your goblin gang. Okay, as I mentioned, and I just want to reiterate this, you want to put 1 card behind your giant, right? Usually you want to put out 1 bait card behind your giant, and not 2. The reason for that, again, being they can spell all of them. They can zap all of them, or they can fireball or poison or log all of them. Now, once they have used their log or their zap or their poison on that bait card, then again, I know I mentioned this, but this is a real important thing to do, is bait out that zap, bait out that log, and then you can much more safely play one of your other bait cards. And guys, even just bats with a giant tanking in front of them will absolutely wreck a tower. So you can see here, is he going to do anything? No, that wasn't a good example, but ideally he'll zap your bats, and then I would be able to safely put down the goblin gang like that. And here you can see, yeah, there's the zap, and now I can kind of safely put down the spear goblins and support that push, and, you know, just connect to the tower there, and they actually finished off the tower with the dark prince there. So, job well done, guys. Good combo. Now in this particular replay, I want to point out how I played a little bit more aggressively, and it kind of paid off for me. And that's something that I'm learning how to do a little bit better in some decks and cycle decks, or rather I need to continue to learn how to do better. is to play with more pressure so that they don't have anything in hand, or you outcycle them, or they just don't have the elixir to counter what you're sending in based on their deck. So here I apply a lot of pressure throughout the game, and I think that does a pretty good job of, you know, shutting him down. Alright, so even if you don't want to place that bait card behind your giant, or if you've lost your bait card, you can use a prince or a dark prince behind the giant, and it will be slowed down. But I mean, a giant plus a prince just wrecks a tower. I mean, it is a heavy investment. It is 10 elixir, like that's a lot. That's a full hand of elixir. But if you can manage to get something like that off, or maybe play the prince on defense and then put the giant aggressively up at the bridge right before the prince crosses, man, if that connects to a tower, it'll wreck it. And the dark prince behind the giant will cleave out any skeleton armies or anything like that that they'll naturally put down to counter your giant. So, really quickly, card replacements. For the Dark Prince, I was thinking of trying this deck with Valkyrie instead of Dark Prince. And I want somebody to try this out. Maybe I'll try it myself, but one of you guys can do it too. Let me know how it goes. Because the Valkyrie is kind of like the new version of the Dark Prince, because she's been getting a ton of buffs lately. She also costs 4 elixir, and she plays a similar role, being a relatively tanky, kind of AoE melee card. She doesn't have that charge effect, and she doesn't have that shield effect, but regardless, she does play a very similar role to the Dark Prince due to the other similarities that I just mentioned, and the fact that she costs the exact same amount of elixir. So try her out in this deck, let me know how it goes. For any of the Zap Bait cards, probably more Zap Bait. I like having the Spear Goblins and the Goblin Gang and the Bats in there, because not only is that Log Bait, it gets you kind of some Zap Bait too with the Bats. But, you know, you can always put in, like, regular goblins, maybe even guards, you can put in a skeleton army, any kind of zap or log bait card like that. Now, for the giant, you could probably go for another heavy tank like a golem, but if you're going to do that, you might want to take a look at the more classic kind of golem double prince beatdown deck. It involves Baby Dragon, if I'm not mistaken, and a tornado. And I did a couple videos on this. In fact, I did a collaboration video with another YouTuber on this particular deck. So go ahead and take a look at that if you haven't already. And yeah. But you know what I mean? I feel like it would work in this deck too. I feel like that element of Zap and Logbait would go really well with a big beatdown deck. You wouldn't have a pump, so it wouldn't be nearly as aggressive. It would be more of a beatdown, but you could probably try it out. Ideally, you want that giant, though, because this deck, part of the beauty and the power of this deck is the ability to play it aggressively and spam stuff at the bridge, especially to punish once they invest a lot of elixir in something. So you might want to go with like a cheaper tank even, like a knight or an ice golem. Ice golem would probably work out pretty well. Alright guys, anyway, that's enough about strategy and card replacements. So for the spells, lastly, you know, of course, as usual, if you don't want Zap, you can put Log, and if you don't want Poison, you could probably put a Fireball, but that giant Poison combo is pretty sick, it's pretty awesome. So, this match I actually lost, and as some of you probably know, I do like incorporating some losses into some of my videos, because that kind of shows you guys where I went wrong, and I kind of like talking about how I could have done things better. And this match, one of the things that I noticed for sure is, because I'm trying so hard to like punish opposite lane and not lose to that P.E.K.K.A, because P.E.K.K.A counters this deck really well. See, what I'm doing there is I'm pushing right even though that tower is at full health, and the reason for that is because my prince will just get wrecked by the P.E.K.K.A. So I figure why not try to push right, and look, the prince connects there and takes out like half that tower's health with just the one charge and his one auto attack swing. But because I'm pushing both lanes, look at the damage separation, like the disparity between the two towers. Rather than having, you know, that much damage on a single tower, it's spread between the two, and that allows him to focus on one tower, while I'm worrying about, okay, which of the two towers is lower health, which one am I going to take out? Now again, I got this massive push going in, but that P.E.K.K.A does an amazing job of just completely shutting down my push. My Spear Goblins get a little bit of chip damage, but she just wrecks the Dark Prince, moves onto the Spear Goblin, smacks it, moves onto the Prince and smacks it, and that's it. And then here comes a deadly counter push. So this is a P.E.K.K.A Hog deck, and it's got an element of spell bait in it too, because it's got that Princess and those Spear Goblins, and so on and so forth. So I actually ran Pekahog for a little bit on ladder. It was pretty fun, but right now I'm just doing that classic E-Barb rage, baby. I'm in that kind of 4K pit that I can't get out of, that 4K 4300 pit. Anyway, look at this damage on both towers here. I got his left tower down really low, so even though he's ahead right here, we're in double elixir, we're in overtime, and he can get a big push going and kind of catch me off guard, and he gets a bunch of swings off with the hog there on my left tower, gets the poison, so that takes all of my swarm cards. I desperately try to put something down to counter that P.E.K.K.A, but the poison pretty much just finishes off my tower. Alright guys, so that's it for this giant double prince video. This awesome kind of beatdown / aggressive deck that also has an element of zap and log bait in it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure that you give it a thumbs up if you did. Leave comments in the comment section below, because I love responding to that. It's one of my favorite things to do with YouTube, is interact with my subscribers and my viewers, so don't hesitate to do that if you have any questions or anything to add. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a good night.